There's a certain number sitting inside your investment portfolio, a number most people either move past the wrong way or never manage to reach at all. It's the point where the yearly growth created by your investments becomes larger than the amount of money you personally contribute every single year. Once you pass it, the entire game changes permanently. The S&P 500's average annual return over the last 30 years through early 2026 sits around 10.1%, while the median retirement account balance in America is only $87,000. The distance between those two realities is where most financial futures are decided, and it gets even stranger. The figure Charlie Munger famously described as the threshold was technically wrong. Not philosophically, mechanically, because inflation has pushed that number almost 97% higher since he originally said it. Much of the financial advice people still hear today relies on an outdated map describing an environment that no longer exists. This video is really about something deeper. In physics, there's a concept called escape velocity. It's the minimum speed required for a rocket to break free from a planet's gravitational pull. On Earth, that speed is roughly 11.2 kilometers per second. Miss it by even 1 kilometer per second, and the rocket doesn't slowly glide into another orbit. It crashes back down entirely, and every bit of fuel wasted. Your investment journey works almost the exact same way. There's a specific dollar amount where everything shifts. Below it, you are the engine. Every bit of progress depends on your own savings and contributions. Above it, compounding becomes the engine, and you become more like a passenger watching your money produce more money than you could realistically add yourself. Most people spend their entire careers burning fuel and end up falling just short of that point. In a few minutes, I'll show you the exact formula to calculate your personal escape velocity based on your current contribution rate. But first, you need to understand why nearly every mainstream financial source understates this threshold by roughly $50,000, how that mistake compounds over decades, and why the financial industry has no real reason to fix it. Charlie Munger talked about it during a Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting back in 1999. The quote became legendary. Munger explained that the hardest stage for most people is building the first $100,000. He said if you're starting from zero, reaching $100,000 is an enormous struggle for the average person. The more famous version, the one repeated endlessly online, was even more direct. Munger basically said the first $100,000 is brutal, but you have to get there no matter what. Walk everywhere. Cut every unnecessary expense. Use coupons if you must. Just find a way to accumulate that first $100,000 because after that point, you can finally ease off a little. The quote spread because the core idea is accurate. The problem is the number itself. Munger made that statement during the mid-1990s, and adjusted for inflation, $100,000 back then equals roughly $200,000 in 2025 dollars. The exact figure changed over time, but the principle did not. Building the first serious pool of invested capital remains the hardest stage, and everything afterward depends on getting over that initial barrier. So the target most people are chasing today, the number shown across financial independence charts and retirement discussions, is based on a figure from more than 25 years ago. After inflation adjustments, that number is much closer to $200,000 today. Yet the entire personal finance world continues repeating $100,000 as if it's some timeless law instead of a price level from the Clinton era. This is how financial myths slowly become retirement strategies. Here's how the math actually works. The true escape velocity threshold, the moment your yearly investment returns exceed your yearly contributions, isn't universal, it's personal. It depends entirely on how much you save each year. The formula itself is simple. Take your annual contributions and divide them by your expected annual return rate. If you invest $12,000 per year and assume a 10% annual return, your threshold becomes $120,000 because 10% of $120,000 equals $12,000. That's the crossover point. That's when the market begins doing more work than you are. The S&P 500's average annual return from January 1996 through December 2025 sits around 10.4%. Which aligns closely with the long-term historical average of roughly 10%. Using 10% as a working estimate, is reasonable because decades of market history consistently support it for diversified long-term investors. The average yearly return of the S&P 500 over the last 30 years through February 2026 is approximately 10.121% with dividends reinvested. Now the numbers start becoming uncomfortable. The average retirement savings balance across American families is $333,940, while the median balance is only $87,000. The average is heavily distorted upward by the wealthiest households. The median represents the actual middle household in America, and that figure is just $87,000. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, 54% of American households report having no dedicated retirement savings whatsoever. So, the median American saver, someone actually participating in the system, currently sits around $87,000 invested. Their escape velocity threshold, assuming they contribute $12,000 annually and earn 10% returns, is about $120,000. They are only $33,000 away. Not $500,000, not $1 million, just $33,000. They're potentially one highly disciplined year or two, average years away from a permanent turning point, and still most never cross it. Stay with me because later I'm going to explain the exact behavioral pattern that stops people from making it over the line. But first, let's break the savings journey into 3 levels because understanding which stage you're currently in should completely change the decisions you make. Level 1 is anything below $50,000 invested. At this stage, behavior matters almost entirely while market returns barely matter at all. If you have $30,000 invested and the S&P 500 gains 10% in a year, you made roughly $3,000. If you panic during a downturn and sell or stop contributing for a few months, you can wipe out a large portion of that gain immediately. At level 1, contribution consistency is the only thing that really matters. Choose a simple broad index fund, automate contributions, and leave it alone. Portfolio complexity means almost nothing at this stage. Staying invested is everything. Level 2 ranges from $50,000 to $200,000. This is the most dangerous stage because it's where most Americans spend the majority of their financial lives. Americans in their 30s hold an average retirement balance around $275,377, but the median balance is only $92,533. That means the typical American in their 30s lives directly in level 2. The danger here is very specific. Losses begin feeling emotionally significant enough to trigger fear, but gains still aren't large enough to create automatic momentum. This is where investors make their worst mistakes. They panic and sell when markets fall because the dollar amounts finally feel substantial. They raid accounts when lifestyle opportunities appear because the money seems accessible. Most escape velocity failures happen right here in level 2. Level 3 begins above $200,000. If you invest $100,000 in the market earning an average 10% annual return, your investment can double approximately every 7.2 years using the rule of 72. After 7.2 years, $100,000 becomes $200,000. About 14 years later, that becomes roughly $400,000 without adding another dollar. At $200,000 invested with a 10% annual return, your portfolio generates about $20,000 annually from market growth alone. If the median American contributes $12,000 yearly, and many contribute far less, the portfolio is now growing faster than the investor can personally contribute. Before reaching this point, wealth creation depends mainly on savings discipline. After crossing it, compounding begins accelerating the process on its own. That's level 3. That's orbit. Here's the uncomfortable part because it bothered me too when I first calculated these numbers properly. Americans in their 50s have an average retirement savings balance of $1,200,838, while the median is $438,866. The median American in their 50s has already crossed escape velocity. A portfolio worth $438,000 earning 10% annually generates nearly $43,800 in yearly market growth. That's almost certainly more than their yearly retirement contributions. They're operating in level 3 whether they realize it or not. Yet during 2024, only 35% of Americans said they felt on track for retirement, slightly higher than 34% in 2023, but below the 40% reported in 2021. Older Americans were more likely to have retirement savings and feel prepared, but even then, only 42% of people between ages 45 and 59, and just 50% of people over 60, believed they were ready. The median 50-year-old American has already achieved escape velocity, yet still experiences level 1 anxiety. That's not primarily a savings issue, it's a framework issue. Nobody explained what stage they were actually in. Most people think the problem is failing to save enough money. In reality, the real danger happens when someone reaches around 90% of the threshold. Let me introduce you to Marcus. Marcus isn't a real individual. He's a pattern repeated so consistently in financial planning that he might as well be real. Marcus is 38 years old. He's been contributing to his 401k for roughly 15 years and currently has $95,000 invested. His wife discovers a vacation property they can barely afford. They don't liquidate the 401k because the early withdrawal penalties plus taxes would cost them around 25% to 30% of whatever they withdrew. Instead, they stop contributing for 2 years and redirect those savings toward the down payment. Just 2 years. Here's the math. At $95,000 invested, Marcus's portfolio naturally grows around 10% annually, roughly $9,500 every year without additional contributions. If he contributes nothing for 2 years, he'll end up with about $115,000. If he had continued contributing $1,000 monthly during that same period, he'd have around $145,000 instead. That's already a $30,000 difference. But that's not the real damage. The true cost is that Marcus would have crossed escape velocity during the first year. He would have spent the second year with market growth exceeding his contributions. Instead, he stayed below the line. He remained trapped in level 2. Extend both outcomes forward to age 61 using 23 years of 10% annual returns alongside resumed $12,000 yearly contributions. In the scenario where Marcus crossed the threshold, he reaches approximately $140,000 by retirement. In the scenario where he paused contributions for 2 years, he ends with roughly $750,000. That 2-year delay cost Marcus nearly $290,000. Not because he withdrew funds, but because he delayed crossing the inflection point and lost the compounding momentum attached to those years. This is the idea I want you remembering for the rest of this video. The threshold isn't simply a number, it's a phase transition. In chemistry, phase transitions happen at exact temperatures and pressures, where substances change state from solid to liquid or liquid to gas. The shift occurs at a precise boundary, not gradually. Your investment life has the same kind of boundary. Cross it, and you become a completely different kind of investor. Miss it, and you continue doing the same work for dramatically smaller results. Below the threshold, every dollar saved carries the full weight of progress. There's little compounding momentum quietly helping in the background. Growth depends almost entirely on your behavior. That's the honest reality of life below escape velocity. And the financial planning industry, the firms selling complicated products, actively managed funds, and endless advisory relationships, often benefits economically from keeping people stuck in level 2, where complexity feels necessary and professional guidance feels essential. There's very little structural incentive pushing clients toward level 3, the point where they need less ongoing management. Most advisors earn more money as your assets grow. That fee structure is built to monetize the journey, not necessarily accelerate you through it. Here's where the story becomes especially painful and where the $50,000 gap mentioned in the title matters most. Many people who finally reach escape velocity, accumulating $150,000, $200,000, or even $250,000, make one major mistake almost immediately afterward. Suddenly, wealth management firms start calling. They begin hearing that their investments deserve professional oversight. They start wondering whether 15 years of simple index fund investing was too unsophisticated. Then they hire an advisor charging 1% annually on assets under management. 1% sounds harmless, but take a $1 million portfolio growing at 7% annually over 30 years. A 1% annual fee could reduce that ending portfolio by around 25%, translating into nearly $1.9 million lost from the final value. Even on smaller portfolios, the damage is massive. Consider a $500,000 account earning 7% annually. Over 25 years without fees, that portfolio could grow to approximately $2.71 million. Add a 1% management fee, and the portfolio grows to only around $2.15 million instead, a difference of about $560,000. These investors finally reached escape velocity only to immediately hand someone a percentage of the fuel. Over a 30-year period, a 1% fee can reduce a portfolio's value by roughly 28%. A 2% fee can reduce it by more than 40%. And to clarify how common these charges are, the median advisory fee sits around 1.02%, meaning approximately $10,200 annually on a $1 million portfolio. Once you include fund expense ratios and platform fees, total yearly costs can climb closer to 1.65%, or roughly $16,500 per year. Compare that with the expense ratios charged by low-cost index funds. Expense ratios are one of the few variables investors fully control. Low-cost S&P 500 funds keep fee drag extremely low. Vanguard's VOO and iShares IVV currently charge about 0.03% annually, while Fidelity's FXAIX charges only 0.015%. The difference between paying 0.03% and 1.65% is absolutely not trivial. Over decades, that gap consumes a meaningful portion of your ending wealth. The evidence is extremely clear. Passive investing repeatedly outperforms active management over long periods, but choosing the lowest cost provider still matters enormously. I'm not against financial advisors entirely. I've worked with accountants and attorneys for years while running my own business. I personally have hundreds of thousands of dollars invested. The tax strategies I learned from professionals around me were worth every dollar I spent. But I paid flat fees for specific advice instead of surrendering a percentage of my assets forever. That difference matters more than most people realize. If your questions involve retirement timing, tax planning, insurance needs, or estate structures, you probably don't need permanent portfolio management. You need a clear plan. And you can usually get one for a flat fee that costs far less than decades of assets under management charges. The fee trap becomes especially destructive for people right at the threshold because it appears exactly when they feel pressured to become more sophisticated. At $90,000 invested, simple index funds feel acceptable. At $200,000, people suddenly feel like they need professionals. But the math actually shows the opposite. At $200,000, compounding has become powerful enough that percentage fees start doing real damage. The larger the portfolio grows, the more destructive those fees become. The right time to simplify and reduce costs is precisely when you cross escape velocity, not when you begin adding layers of complexity. Understanding these concepts as a connected framework is different from vaguely knowing they exist. Here's the honest truth. I understood escape velocity and the general idea of an inflection point for years. What I didn't have was a system translating all of it. The threshold calculations, withdrawal rates, sequence of return risks, and health insurance gaps before Medicare into an actual retirement timeline. So I built one. I wrote a book called The Exit Code. It's 8 chapters built from 50 years of retirement data without unnecessary filler. 2 concepts inside directly connect to this topic. First is what I call the 4% trap. Why the traditional withdrawal rate advisors promoted for decades often fails at exactly the wrong moment, and the dynamic withdrawal system that can replace it. Second is the 58% rule. Data showing that many Americans are forced out of work earlier than expected because of layoffs or health problems, and the specific buffer required to survive that scenario. Both ideas mainly matter once you've already crossed escape velocity. They're level 3 problems. The book costs less than dinner through the link below. Now let's tie everything together using a realistic example. David is 41 years old and earns $85,000 annually. He's been investing steadily since his late 20s and has accumulated $127,000 between his 401k and a small taxable brokerage account. Between his own savings and his employer match, he contributes roughly $12,000 each year. At a 10% annual return, David's $127,000 portfolio generates about $12,700 yearly in market growth. His yearly contributions equal $12,000. He has just barely crossed escape velocity for the first time in his life. He almost certainly has no idea this happened. No brokerage account sends a notification when you cross the threshold. No employer retirement plan rings a bell. Here's David's projected future using actual numbers. If he maintains his current $12,000 yearly contributions, reinvests every dividend and capital gain, and earns the historical 10% annual return by holding a diversified market index fund without panic selling during crashes, then by age 61, 20 years from now, his portfolio would likely reach around $940,000, nearly $1 million starting from $127,000 today. But here's what could easily happen instead. Over the next year and a half, David's brother-in-law convinces him that buying an investment property would be smarter than keeping money inside his brokerage account. David withdraws $30,000 from investments and pauses his 401k contributions for 18 months to cover the mortgage payments. His portfolio drops from $127,000 down to roughly $70,000 after accounting for the withdrawal and the missed $1,000 monthly contributions. He falls back into level 2. He loses escape velocity under the same 10% annual return assumptions. His projected retirement portfolio at age 61 becomes roughly $650,000 instead of $940,000. That's a difference of nearly $290,000 caused by one Level 2 decision made by someone who had already entered Level 3. The $50,000 gap referenced in the title is very real. It's essentially the amount by which the average person who nearly reaches escape velocity falls short. The national median retirement balance is around $87,000. The threshold for someone contributing $12,000 annually is about $120,000. The difference is $33,000. Add in fees, setbacks, bad decisions, difficult years, and behavioral mistakes, and the realistic gap becomes closer to $50,000. That's the number in the title. And if you're currently living in Level 2, it's probably the most important number in your financial life. 3 final takeaways, and these are specific to this exact discussion rather than generic advice. First, calculate your personal escape velocity number immediately after this video. Add together everything you contribute yearly, including 401k contributions, IRAs, brokerage investments, and anything else. Divide that total by your expected annual return rate. Using 10% means dividing by 0.1. The result is your threshold number. Write it down. Put it on your retirement dashboard. Most people optimize for the wrong targets. They focus on contributing 15% or building emergency savings. Those are Level 1 goals. Level 2 requires optimizing around a precise dollar amount tied to a specific timeline. Second, protect your threshold crossing like it's irreplaceable, because in many ways it is. The most financially expensive mistakes happen between 90% and 110% of your escape velocity number. That range where the money finally feels substantial but hasn't yet built unstoppable compounding momentum is where withdrawals for lifestyle upgrades create maximum long-term damage. Make a rule for yourself. No non-emergency withdrawals from investment accounts while you are within $50,000 of your threshold in either direction. Repeatedly crossing and falling back below the line can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars by retirement age. Third, the exact moment you cross escape velocity is the worst possible time to add ongoing percentage fees. That's the moment to simplify, not complicate. Flat fee advice for specific decisions. Annual tax reviews with a CPA, retirement planning sessions, or estate planning with an attorney are worth paying for. Surrendering a percentage of everything you own forever while your assets compound into level 3 is financially equivalent to attaching a parachute to a rocket immediately after it reaches orbit. Get advice when needed. Pay hourly or flat fees. Keep the compounding for yourself. Before the inflection point, your net worth depends mostly on how much you save. Afterward, your money starts doing more of the work than you do. That's the entire game. And the distance between where most people currently are and where the threshold actually sits, the distance this industry has little incentive to help you close, is roughly $33,000 to $50,000. That's it. One or two disciplined years. One refusal to fall backward below the line. Boring index investing has created more wealth than speculative internet trends ever will. The 54% of Americans with zero retirement savings probably are not watching this video. The real question is whether the people watching understand which level they're currently living in, and whether they understand exactly how expensive it becomes to miss the threshold by just a little.